Hello there, everybody. So after two primers on psychosis, I think that we're now ready to interpret what we're going to be looking at today, which is one of the most important books in the foundation of psychology, called Memoirs of My Nervous Illness. All right, so let's just have a quick summary of what we've gone over so far. We've learned that despite leading the charge, a lot of the initial rationalizations about psychosis were not sophisticated enough to capture the problem that they were aimed at. And that's because upon closer inspection, psychosis challenges a lot of our preconceptions about the very nature of mind, identity, and consciousness. We've highlighted the most common characteristics of the disease, such as hallucinations, speech and thought disorganization. We also saw the flat affect that awards a lot of schizophrenics with this deadpan effect to their expression. And we also learned that with altered states comes altered relationships. Conditions such as schizophrenia affect our sensory and cognitive harmony, which in turn reorganizes the way that we relate to existence itself, which can sometimes lead people with these conditions to become skeptical over the validity of ordinary existence. And so with that knowledge in place, let's begin with a bit of background information about Daniel Schreiber before we go on to have a look at what was in his diaries. Daniel Schreiber was an appeals judge living in Germany in the 19th century, so he was a very well-educated and very distinguished man during his time. That is, until he fell to several breakdowns that manifested in symptoms that we today would classify as schizophrenia. However, what makes Schreiber so important to the development of psychology is that he recorded all of his psychotic experiences in a series of diaries which later went on to become an influential book called Memoirs of My Nervous Illness. Now, bear in mind that we're talking about a time when the discipline of psychology was still at a very young age. So Schreiber's diaries became instruction manuals of sorts for many influential practitioners in the field, including big names such as Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. And this video is going to be an excavation of those diaries. Like with the last video, Psychosis Part 2, I've called upon the help of a couple of artists. Joan Pope is making a return appearance to help us out with the recital of some of the passages, and also the artist Matthew Mackenzie, who will be playing the part of Daniel Schreiber himself. So, with all that now being said, let's have a look at what's in these diaries. Memoirs is more than just a book. It's a revelation of nature. A gross recount of its contents details the unravelling of one man's life after his dethronement from both profession and standing by the onset of nervous collapse. However, we could see the book from another perspective. Human beings convey information like plants give off pollen. These information spores become encoded into new media such as language, art, books and videos like the one that you're watching right now, which cluster together to form information ecosystems that we call cultures. Through contact with cultures, human beings fertilize existing information sets within their intelligence and spawn new ways of thinking and communicating about their experience. This is an ability unique to nature, the ability to both encode and receive information from media affords human beings with an access and insight into the dynamism of their life that no other creature can equal. For this reason, a book like Memoirs is not merely a material object. It's a unique evolutionary window into the life of an organism in flux, a complex life form that encoded the dialogues of a strange communion with the nervous languages of its own body, a body whose signals spoke in hushed vagaries, in messages that were at once cryptic, while seemingly ripe with prophetic meaning, petals of mania unfolding as a private cosmology of nerves and rays, all overseen by an envious and predatory God. Its pages contain odd chapters that read things like God and the process of creation, insects created by miracles, nerve language, egocentricity of the rays regarding my person, and bodily integrity damaged by miracles. These are all condensations of a myriad of experiences that were exacted upon the psychology of Daniel Schreiber by the perturbations of his own nervous system. Through them he undergoes bizarre rites of transformation between male and female guises. On one occasion, he talks about the dilemma of having lost his own stomach, and then on another, of having his consciousness invaded by spirits who want to use his body as a grave to die in, albeit communicated in that admixture of the precise and the metaphoric so common to human description. The most notable thing about the memoirs is the astonishing level of detail which Schreiber writes in when attempting to describe the nature of his experiences. Schreiber's accounts attest to a deepening sensitivity regarding the nature of his situation, which he was, admirably, and with what sanity he still had remaining, trying to understand. Let's hear a demonstration of this now in an excerpt from the book.
The human soul is contained within the nerves of the body. About their physical nature, I, as a layman, cannot say more than they are extraordinarily delicate structures, and that the total mental life of a human being rests on their excitability by external impressions. From the most tender beginnings, they develop to a complex system which embraces the most widespread regions of human knowledge, the soul of mature man. Circumstances seem to be such that every single nerve of intellect represents the total mental individuality of a human being.
Schreiber is clearly intelligent and very articulate, no doubt a partial consequence of his esteemed upbringing. Yet his grace with words points to something more significant. It seems that almost by accident the psychosis has awarded Schreiber access to a deeper appreciation of his nervous anatomy than many people, save the curious or scientifically minded, would likely consider. It speaks to something that I said in a previous video, that only when our psychic equilibrium is disturbed do we stop to really appreciate the delicate fibres upon which its habitual activity was granted. Nerves are integral to Schreiber's private cosmology. They are not only causal as to why he's found himself in this predicament. In his reasoning, they encompass the intercommunicative networks through which all information in the cosmos is circulated. Information is sent across these nerves through a phenomena called rays. So if nerves are the telephone cables of the universe, then rays are the wavelengths that emanate from them to produce the voices, visions, and all manner of hallucinatory cornucopia in Schreiber's psychic life. Through these nerves and rays, all cosmic communication is potentially facilitated. I say potentially because Schreiber came to the very precise understanding as to how this network operated, and this plays directly into how he conceived of his relationship to his psychological condition. According to Schreiber, all people possess nerves, but certain people have more brilliant nerves than others, facilitating advanced conversation with the unseen entities of the universe, including God himself. Daniel Schreiber was a Christian and was convinced that God also possessed nerves of his own, except his nerves were infinite and travel throughout all ranges of the universe. The nerves of God also possessed the miraculous ability to transform themselves into all known things in the created world, which eventually leads on in the diaries to account for the vast diversity of his hallucinatory expression. He also believed that even though people could reach the mind of God through means such as an earnest prayer, for example, God was the sole sentient gatekeeper of the universe and therefore communicated with humans much more than they could communicate with him. Through his interference, God was able to seed the minds of men with all manner of expression, both beneficial or tormenting. According to Schreiber, this is why people could receive blessings of great creativity or strokes of scientific genius, because they were being seeded by God into the minds of people who possessed the most brilliant nerves. This reasoning has echoes that take us back to the days of ancient Greece, where many people reasoned that creative genius was not conceived of by artists, but was the consequence of a great god such as Apollo or the Muses breathing that genius into the minds of artists. Let's listen to another passage by Schreber now, where he's talking about this process and also explains the reason as to why God eventually turned on him.
As a rule, God did not interfere directly with the fate of peoples or individuals. It could, however, occur now and again by exception, but neither did nor could happen too frequently, because to draw too close to living mankind was connected with certain dangers, even for God himself. He was able to form nerve contact, as the voices that speak to me call this process, with highly gifted people in order to bless them with some kind of fertilizing ideas about the beyond. But such nerve contact was not to become the rule, because the nerves of human beings, particularly under a high state of excitation, have such power of attraction for the nerves of God that he would not be able to free himself from them again, and would thus endanger his existence.
We can clearly see that Schreber's hallucinatory experiences have become organized into a new cosmology. It also extends the interpretation of his illness from a medical one into a cosmic blessing which he, as one of the highly gifted people, has been graced with. Of final importance, it awards a person like Schreber with something human beings universally yearn for, a locus, and the authoritative claim that secures a reliable world image in which we can play a major part. He is doing what artists do explicitly, and what all people do privately. He is world-building, he is myth-making, he is living out the conditions of his existence within a psychological simulation of the world. Despite the fact that he suffered under his illness, he also believed that he was special enough to have been born with enough peculiarity to disturb the creator of the universe himself. Psychosis sometimes fosters delusions of grandeur in those that suffer it, believing themselves to be the special insiders of a secret world that the less fortunate or more mundane cannot bear witness to. This grandeur does not have to be articulated with any shred of arrogance. It can work its way very subtly into the thinking process, as a way of accounting for why the hallucinatory phenomena has arisen in their lives. Let's hear another account from the Memoirs where he talks about the speciality of his nature. And as you're listening, also notice how Schreber is talking about some common symptoms of schizophrenia, such as thought pattern disruption and the paranoid notion that other people are remotely invading his thoughts.
Apart from normal human language, there is also another kind of nerve language, of which, as a rule, the healthy human being is not aware. In my case, however, since my nervous illness took a critical turn, my nerves have been set in motion from without, incessantly and without respite. Divine rays, above all, have the power of influencing the nerves of a human being. By this manner, God has always been able to infuse dreams into a sleeping human being. I myself first felt this influence as emanating from Professor Fleischig. The only possible explanation that I can think of is that Professor Fleischig in some way knew how to put the divine rays to his use. This influence showed itself relatively early in the form of compulsive thinking, an expression which I received from the inner voices themselves, and which will hardly be known to other human beings, because the whole phenomenon lies outside of all human experience.
As we have previously mentioned, the awakening of Schreber's nerves came with some troubling consequences. Near the beginning of his illness, Schreber entertained paranoid beliefs that there was a universal conspiracy to destroy his reason and his soul. I say universal because he believed that God was at work to commit what Schreber called a soul murder against him. The reason for this act of spiritual assassination was that through the intelligence of the rays, Schreber had learned that God had become disquieted after learning that there was another conscious centre in the universe, which, of course, was Schreber. A consequence of this came in the form of a bizarre rite of transformation, in a process that Schreber called unmanning. Unmanning was the name that Schreber gave to the experience of being slowly transformed into the guise of a woman as a side effect of prolonged exposure to the rays.
This is connected on the one hand with the nature of God's nerves, through which blessedness is felt, if not exclusively as, at least accompanied by, a greatly increased feeling of voluptuousness.
This voluptuousness was the phantom experience of sensing female breasts and reproductive organs manifest in place of his own physical features. Schreber was convinced that these events were the result of prolonged contact with the rays, and worked into God's damage control scheme to secure his position in the universe. Schreber's nerve excitement was so intense that these perturbations of his cognitive and sensory faculties became rationalized into the new cosmological order that his mind had concocted. Schreber did not harbor any ill intent towards God in his writings. In fact, he seems to sympathize with God's tyrannizing over him as a necessary act of universal self-maintenance. He started to believe that God was attacking his mental faculties, under the tactic that if his nerves cannot be fully deconstructed, they should remain eternally muted.
There arose from God the most murderous demand that I should behave continually as if I myself were a corpse.
This might be a reference to a form of catatonia that Schreber is experiencing here. In this rigid posture, his hallucinations merge into an almost shamanistic roleplay, though instead of wishing to control the spirits, he receives them into himself vortex-like. His body becomes a place where all spirits shall be drawn down from the rays to die within the grave of his own body. As he hallucinates, he hears the voice of his wife, who he believes to be dead.
I repeatedly had the nerves belonging to my wife's soul in my body. These soul parts were the devoted love that my wife has always shown me. They were the only souls to show willingness to renounce their own further existence and find their end in my body, expressing it in the basic language as,
Let me dissolve in my husband's body.
Schreber's rationale suggests that by drawing down all the impure spirits in the universe to die within him, he could absolve not only them of their impurity, but also effect a universal restructuring within the order of the world, which might potentially translate into a lessening of his condition and put him right with God. We see how fully enmeshed he has become with this new cosmology, how he sees himself as occupying the principal part, with God playing both the role of Father Creator and tyrannizing antagonist simultaneously. In his psychotic grandiosity, Schreber believes that he has the power to unseat the laws of creation, but what he longs for most of all is to cure himself, to settle the excitement of his nerves, and to return to a normal life through effecting a grand plan as the salvation of his own soul and the souls of millions of others. He quotes from another passage in the book where he is almost triumphantly declaring the failure of God to succeed in the assassination attempt, and that his diaries will last throughout the ages as the pages that not only told of the defeat of the Creator, but deal a twofold blow by discrediting the authority of all recent academic developments.
All attempts at committing soul murder, and later at the destruction of my reason, have failed. From this apparently so unequal battle between one weak human being and God himself, I emerge, albeit not without bitter sufferings and deprivations, victorious, because the order of the world is on my side. Perhaps the personal misfortunes I've had to suffer and the loss of states of blessedness may even be compensated for, in that mankind will gain all at once, through my case, the knowledge of religious truth in much greater measure than could possibly have been achieved in hundreds of thousands of years by means of scientific research. It need hardly be said what incalculable gain it would be for mankind if, through my personal fate, the foundations of mere materialism and of hazy pantheism would once and for all be demolished.
Alright then, there we have it. Memoirs of My Nervous Illness by Daniel Schreber. Very, very interesting accounts, aren't they? And just think this is one of the most foundational books in the development of psychology, so I think that it's a worthwhile inclusion to go over. I will say, though, that I've tailored a lot of these videos with a logical sequence in mind building up to this. I mean, as interesting as the memoirs are, I think that without the prior foundations that we've built up with the primer on psychosis part 1 and 2, then we wouldn't be in the kind of position that we are now to be able to really look at these kind of accounts with new eyes, because I think that without that, this simply would have been an indulgence in oddness and strangeness. Though when you actually put it in context with what we've said about psychosis in the prior 2 videos, then it allows us to see them with fresh eyes, don't you think? So I'm going to leave it at that for today. I just want to say before I go, this is very important, thank you very much for the help that I received in this video from the 2 artists, Joan Pope and Matthew Fall Mackenzie. They both did a great job with their respective readings, and if you could please just take a few minutes out of your time and kindly check out some of their work in the links below. They're both very, very talented artists, very different than the kind of stuff that I do, but very authentic in their own right, and they both have excellent vision. So yeah, please take the time just to look at their work and help them out a bit. That would be greatly appreciated. So, not to take up any more of your time, I think that we'll wrap it up here, and I'll simply say thank you very much for watching again, and as usual, I will see you again.